You have asked the question before. You have sat with your finances spread out in front of you, looked at the numbers, looked at the distance between where you are and where you need to be, and asked it again. How will this ever happen? Not as a prayer, not as a declaration of faith, but as a demand for a map before you will allow yourself to believe. You have been waiting for the source to hand you a visible route before you will permit yourself to trust it. And that waiting, dressed as wisdom, dressed as practicality, dressed as simple responsibility, has been the very thing stopping the movement you keep asking for. Wallace Wattles understood something that most people in financial fear never discover. He understood that the question is not whether the source can move. The source is always capable of moving. The real question is whether the mind standing at the threshold is still trying to control the method. He taught a way of getting rich that was not rooted in calculation, frantic planning, or anxious problem solving. It was rooted in a specific inner state, and that inner state cannot coexist with the demand to know how before you trust. This teaching is for everyone who has wanted the life deeply and honestly, but has been asking the wrong question at the wrong moment, in the wrong inner condition, and has wondered why nothing comes. The mind that asks how is not doing something wrong. It is doing something understandable. When you look at your present financial situation and try to calculate a path forward, you are using the only tools you believe you have. You are looking at your monthly income and measuring it against what you owe. You are looking at your age and deciding whether there is still time. You are looking at the contacts you have and concluding that the people around you cannot open the doors you need. You are doing the mathematics of the visible world and trusting the answer that mathematics produces. This is how the old mind works. It surveys what is visible and declares what is possible based on that survey alone. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from this kind of calculation. It is not the exhaustion of doing too much. It is the exhaustion of carrying a problem your mind was never built to solve. Every morning you wake up, and the first thing the mind does is run the numbers again. The income has not changed, the debt has not disappeared, the contact who was supposed to come through has not called, and so the mind recalculates with the same old figures and arrives at the same old conclusion. There is no way, or if there is a way, it is narrow and painful and uncertain, and it involves waiting for someone or something in the visible world to move first. Time is one of the walls the mind builds. You tell yourself that if this had happened 5 years earlier, when you were younger, when you had more energy, when your circumstances were different, it might have worked. You tell yourself that you have waited too long. You tell yourself that the window you needed has already closed. And this thought, which feels like honest self-assessment, quietly closes the door from the inside. It is not your age that closes the door. It is the thought about your age that closes it. The source does not operate on a human timeline, but the mind that is doing the calculating does not know that, because it has only ever watched visible doors open and close on visible schedules. Debt does the same thing. When money is owed in more directions than money is coming in, the mind focuses entirely on the deficit. It sees the gap and asks, how will this gap ever close? And because it is asking from inside the gap, it cannot see the channels that exist outside the gap. It cannot perceive an opportunity it has not already approved as financially rational. It cannot receive an instruction that does not fit the existing plan, because there is no existing plan that accounts for invisible supply. The mind locks itself inside the visible problem and then wonders why it cannot find an invisible solution. Your contacts and connections feel like your network of possibility. You look at the people around you and you judge your future based on who they are, what they have access to, and whether they seem likely to help you move forward. When the visible people around you are struggling too, or unavailable, or disconnected from the world you are trying to reach, the mind declares that the channels are closed. It says, I have looked at the people who could help me, and none of them are capable of delivering what I need. And so the whole responsibility of provision is placed on the few visible individuals the mind has approved as legitimate sources. When they cannot deliver, the mind concludes that nothing can. Market conditions carry enormous weight in the calculating mind. You listen to the news, you watch the numbers, you hear what is happening in the economy, and you allow those reports to define what is available to you. The market is contracting, so your receiving must contract with it. The industry is struggling, so your prosperity must struggle alongside it. You are using external conditions as permission slips for internal doubt. And the invisible law does not recognize those permission slips. The law of invisible supply does not read the financial news, it reads the inner state of the one who is asking. But the calculating mind does not know this, and so it continues to let the visible world define the invisible potential. Family obligations add a particular weight to the demand for method. When you are responsible for other people, when children or parents or a partner depend on the income you generate, the demand to know how becomes urgent in a way that feels completely morally justified. How can I trust an invisible source when real people are counting on me right now? This is not irresponsibility speaking, this is love speaking through the vocabulary of fear. And Wattles understood this. He never asked anyone to abandon responsibility. He asked them to see that the calculating panic created by that responsibility was not the same thing as actually fulfilling it. Fear is not provision, anxiety is not action, and demanding a visible map before trusting the source is not protecting the people you love. It is blocking the very channel that could actually reach them. All of this adds up to one single experience. You look at the total picture of your life, your income, your debt, your time, your contacts, your market, your obligations, and the mind says, there is no viable how. There is no clear, calculable, financially rational method available right now that can take you from here to where you need to be. And so the mind either spins in panic, looking for one, or it shuts down in resignation, concluding there is none. Both of those responses have one thing in common. They are both telling the source that it must fit inside the visible world before it will be trusted. And the source, by its very nature, does not fit inside the visible world. It works through it, but it does not begin with it. Here is the contradiction that lives inside you right now. You have asked the source to move. You have prayed or declared or visualized or believed in a quiet, private space that there must be more, that the life you are living cannot be the full measure of what is available to you. You have genuinely reached towards something larger, and in the same breath, often in the same moment, you have demanded that it come in a way you can recognize, verify, track, and understand before you let it in. You want the infinite to work, but only through methods the finite mind has already approved. This is the contradiction that most spiritual seekers never name clearly. It is not a contradiction between faith and action. Wattles was never against action. It is not a contradiction between trust and responsibility. He was never against responsibility. The contradiction is between genuinely wanting the source to move and quietly requiring it to present its credentials before you will stand aside. You are like a person who says they trust the bridge while standing at the edge, unable to take the first step until someone explains the engineering. The bridge does not need to explain itself. It needs you to walk. The old mind asks the infinite to use finite tools. This is the operating error beneath the surface. When you demand to know how before you will believe, you are not simply being cautious. You are placing the infinite inside a box the finite mind has already measured and declared too small. You are telling the source, I believe you can move, but only through the channels I have already identified, only through the people I have already assessed, only through the methods I can already follow, only through the timeline I have already calculated. And when none of those channels deliver on that demand, you interpret the silence as evidence that the source is not moving, when the actual evidence is that you have placed conditions on how it is allowed to move. There is a version of this error that feels deeply spiritual. People sometimes say, I am being patient. I am waiting for the right sign. I am being careful not to rush. But behind the patience and the caution and the careful waiting, there is a specific requirement that has never been lifted. The requirement that the source deliver through a visible, traceable, logically satisfying method before the full inner permission of faith is granted. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like grounded spiritual maturity. But if you look at it from the inside, it is still the old mind placing itself in the position of judge, deciding in advance whether the source has qualified to be trusted. The infinite is not indifferent to your situation. That is not the problem. The problem is directional. You are pointing your attention at the visible method and waiting for it to become convincing when the entire teaching of Wattles points in the opposite direction. He taught that the movement begins inside. The inner state of clear desire, of living in faith, of holding the image with gratitude and certainty, is not the reward that comes after the method becomes visible. It is the cause. It is the condition that allows the method to become visible in the first place. But the mind that is waiting for the method to appear before granting faith has reversed the entire sequence. You may have experienced moments when something worked that you did not plan, a conversation that happened unexpectedly, a connection that came from a direction you had not approached, a circumstance that resolved itself in a way your calculations had not predicted. In those moments, the mind usually says, "Well, that was lucky," or "That was a coincidence," or "I am glad that worked, but I cannot count on that happening again." And by refusing to learn from those moments, the mind returns to its position of demanding method before faith. It discards the very evidence that the source can work through channels the calculating mind never approved, because admitting that evidence would require changing the operating system. The inner contradiction deepens when the viewer considers how much energy has already been spent in method hunting. Hours and days and months spent researching, calculating, planning, pivoting, adjusting, trying another approach, abandoning it, trying a third. All of that energy was real effort, and some of it produced real results. But if you look at the results honestly, you will often notice that the most significant turning points in your life, the ones where things actually moved, were not the ones where the planning was most thorough. They were the ones where you moved with faith before the map was complete, where you walked through a door that did not yet make total sense. And the mind does not want to accept that lesson, because accepting it means loosening the grip on the very control it believes is keeping you safe. Here is the confrontation this teaching requires. You have not failed to receive because the source ran out of channels. You have not failed to receive because the visible world is hostile. You have not failed to receive because you are not clever enough to find the method. You have been circling the same place because the very act of demanding the method from a position of fear has been the signal you are sending inward and outward, the signal that says, "I do not yet believe. I am still requiring proof before permission. I am still placing the infinite in the dock and asking it to prove its case." And that signal, repeated every time the mind runs its anxious calculation, has been louder than any prayer, declaration, or desire you have ever voiced. Wallace Wattles did not write a book about positive thinking. He did not write a book about visualizing success and waiting for the universe to deliver a check. He wrote a precise, methodical account of the laws by which wealth is formed from invisible substance. And he was very clear that both inner state and outer action were required. He called it the certain way, and the certain way was not a vague feeling of abundance. It was a disciplined inner posture combined with faith-directed action. Understanding what he actually taught is not a small matter, because most people who have heard his ideas have received a diluted version that strips out the law and leaves only the wish. Wattles began with a premise that most people in financial difficulty find difficult to accept. He said that there is a thinking substance from which all things are made. He said that this substance permeates and penetrates all things. He said that when a person impresses a thought upon this substance, it takes the form of that thought and creates it in the visible world. This is not poetry. For Wattles, this was the operating law beneath the physical surface of reality. He was not asking the reader to believe this emotionally or philosophically. He was asking them to work with it practically, the way an engineer works with the law of gravity, not by feeling moved by it, but by using it accurately to build something that stands. Within this framework, the role of the person seeking wealth is specific. It is not to figure out the route. It is not to calculate the how. It is not to solve the problem of delivery. The role of the person is threefold. First, to form a clear and definite desire. A vague wish that things were different is not the same as a clear mental image held with certainty. Wattles was precise. The image must be definite, it must be sustained, and it must be held with gratitude as if it already belongs to you. Second, to hold that image in the state of faith, not belief that something might happen, not hope that conditions will eventually improve. Faith is the inner certainty that what is impressed upon the formless substance is already in the process of becoming form. Third, to act in the certain way, to take the action that is appropriate to the present moment, not to force outcomes, not to seize on every opportunity with panic, but to move with purpose in the direction of the desire, acting on the clearest next available instruction. What Wattles explicitly separated from this process was the anxious demand to control the method of delivery. He understood that the formless substance, what some call source, God, the universe, or infinite supply, is not limited to the channels the calculating mind can see. The source can deliver through completely unexpected arrangements, through conversations that were never planned, through doors that open from directions the mind never approached, through circumstances that resolve in ways that make no rational sense from the inside of the problem. And Wattles argued that the mind's job is not to supervise that process. The mind's job is to maintain the inner state with precision and act in faithful response to whatever clear next step presents itself. The responsibility the viewer carries is real, and Wattles never asked anyone to abandon it. But he made a critical distinction between the responsibility of holding the desire with faith and taking clear action, and the false responsibility of controlling how the invisible is allowed to work. The first is genuine participation in the law. The second is interference. When you step in front of the source and say, "I will trust you, but only if you work through this channel, on this timeline, in this recognizable form," you are not exercising responsibility. You are exercising the fear of trusting something your eyes cannot verify. And Wattles understood that this fear, wearing the mask of practicality, was the primary reason most people never moved from desire to result. He also taught that gratitude was not a pleasant emotional addition to the process. It was a functional part of the mechanism. When you hold the desire with genuine gratitude, you are positioning yourself inside the state of already receiving. Gratitude points the mind toward what is coming rather than what is missing. It keeps the inner image alive and clean without the interference of doubt. When the mind is running its anxious how calculation, it is doing the opposite. It is rehearsing the gap. It is practicing the state of not yet having. And that state of not yet having, held with emotional intensity and repeated daily, is itself a form of communication with the formless substance. It impresses upon it the image of lack, rather than the image of provision. Wattles was also clear that a person must think in a certain way about other people and about wealth itself. He said that wealth obtained in the certain way does not come at the expense of anyone else. The formless substance is not a finite resource where one person's receiving means another's loss. It is infinite. It is always expanding. And the person who enters the process in the certain way is working with the grain of this infinite expansion, not against it. This matters for the how question, because when the mind demands a specific route, it is often unconsciously trying to control not just the method but the fairness of the exchange. And Wattles said that the source handles the fairness of the exchange. The viewer's responsibility is to stay in the certain way. The certain way also includes what Wattles described as doing every day all that can be done that day. This is not aggressive overwork. This is not frantic effort to force the channel open. It is the practice of using each present day fully and faithfully, doing what the present moment calls for without deferring action until the full route becomes visible. A builder does not see the completed house before laying the first stone, but he lays the first stone correctly, in the right place with the right material, trusting that each correct stone placed in faithful sequence will eventually stand as the form the image held. That is the action Wattles requires. Faithful, present, correct, and not contingent on seeing the completed building before beginning. The certain way requires what could be described as a relationship between three things held simultaneously. The clarity of the desire, which gives the formless substance a definite form to organize around. The certainty of faith, which keeps the impression active and consistent rather than interrupted by doubt. And the faithfulness of action, which keeps the person moving in the right direction without substituting panic or passivity for purposeful movement. When all three are operating, Wattles argued that the invisible law has everything it needs to organize the visible world in response. When one of them collapses, and asking how from fear collapses all three, the process stops. Many readers of Wattles took from his work only the permission to desire wealth without guilt. That was a valuable teaching in its time and remains valuable now. But they missed the rigor, they missed the precision, they missed the discipline of the inner posture and the faithful consistency of the action required. Wattles did not say that wealth would come to those who wanted it most desperately. He said it would come to those who held the image with faith, expressed gratitude as a living practice, and acted in the certain way every day available to them. The desperation of the how question is not part of that description. The calm certainty of the one who trusts the source and acts faithfully is, the law that Wattles described, is not a spiritual comfort. It is a working principle, and like all working principles, it requires that the user apply it accurately. You cannot apply Newton's law of gravity by deciding that gravity should work differently today because your situation calls for it. You work with the law as it operates, not as you wish it would operate. The same is true here. The formless substance does not respond to the loudness of the desire or the urgency of the need. It responds to the precision of the inner impression. And the precision of the inner impression is what is destroyed every time the how question is asked from fear. If you take one thing from what Wattles actually taught, let it be this. Your responsibility is not to know the route. Your responsibility is to hold the clear image with faith, act faithfully in the present moment, and release the delivery to the intelligence that moves through the formless substance. The source already knows the how. The source already sees the channels you cannot see, the people you have not yet met, the doors that exist in directions your eyes have not yet turned. Your responsibility begins inside, and it ends with faithful action in the present day. Everything between those 2 points belongs to the law. When people say that Wattles taught them to release the how, many of them hear it as permission to stop engaging with their situation, as if releasing the how means releasing responsibility, as if it means becoming passive, waiting in comfortable spiritual distance from the real-world problem, trusting that the universe will sort things out while no action is taken. This is not only wrong, it is the opposite of what Wattles meant, and this misunderstanding has turned a powerful law into a comfortable justification for standing still. Releasing the how, in the true meaning of the teaching, is a precise spiritual act. It means removing the requirement that the source work through a method the mind has already approved. It means ending the interference that comes from insisting on a particular channel, a particular timeline, a particular recognizable form of delivery. It does not mean removing desire. It does not mean removing effort. It does not mean sitting in silence and waiting for money to arrive without any corresponding action. It means redirecting the inner posture from control to trust, and from panic to purposeful movement, so that the action you take is guided by faithful responsiveness rather than fearful calculation. Think of the difference between a person who walks into a dark building holding a candle and a person who refuses to enter until someone turns on all the lights simultaneously. The one holding the candle does not see the whole room at once. They see only as far as the light reaches. But each step taken in the direction the candle illuminates brings them into contact with the next section of the room. They do not need the full map. They need the next visible step, taken in the right spirit, in the right direction. Releasing the how is choosing to walk by candle rather than refusing to move until every light in the building confirms the way is clear. The method appears after the state is corrected. This is the practical spiritual sequence that Wattles described, even if he did not always use those exact words. When the inner state shifts from fearful method hunting to faithful clear desire, the mind begins to perceive the world differently. Not because the world has changed in that instant, but because the perceiving instrument has changed. A mind, locked in anxious how calculation, sees closed doors everywhere. Not because the doors are all closed, but because the mental lens through which it looks is organized around closedness, around absence, around the question that cannot yet be answered. A mind that has corrected its inner state begins to notice open doors it had been walking past. It begins to hear things it had been filtering out. It begins to act on impulses it had previously dismissed as unrealistic. This shift in perception is not mystical in the lazy sense. It is not the universe magically rearranging itself because of positive feelings. It is the practical result of a changed inner instrument perceiving the same world more accurately. Wattles said that the formless substance works through the minds and hands and actions of people. When your inner state allows you to be one of those instruments clearly and faithfully, the source can work through you and through the world around you in ways that were unavailable when you were blocked by anxious calculation. The phrase "releasing the how" is not an escape from difficulty. It is an upgrade of the tool you are using to engage with difficulty. When you stop demanding that the source prove itself through approved channels, you make yourself available to the unapproved channels, the unexpected ones, the ones that do not match the plan, but that actually move. You stop blocking the instructions that come as quiet internal nudges because they do not fit the method you had in mind. You stop dismissing the door that appears from an unexpected direction because it does not match the map you drew in your panic. You become, in Wattles's language, someone who is doing every day what can be done that day, but doing it with open hands rather than clenched fists. There is a specific relief that comes when this meaning settles into the body and not just the mind. Not the relief of someone who has found a reason to do nothing. The relief of someone who has finally stopped carrying a weight that was never theirs to carry. The weight of knowing the route. The weight of managing the method. The weight of supervising the invisible. When you set that down, not out of carelessness, but out of trust in the law that Wattles described, you become lighter in a way that changes how you move, how you speak, how you perceive the next available door. That lightness is not comfort, it is capability. It is the state the law actually requires. Wattles was insistent that this teaching must not be used as an excuse for what he called the poverty of spirit that accompanies passive waiting. He wrote about the need for continuous action, for doing what the present day requires, for not leaving until tomorrow what this day is calling for. The release he described is not a release from action. It is a release from the requirement that the action produce a visible, traceable, predictable result before the inner faith is maintained. You act because the certain way requires action. You act because faithful movement is part of the law, but you act without placing on that action the demand that it must by itself reveal the complete route. You take the step the candle illuminates, and you trust the source to illuminate the next one. The forgotten meaning of this teaching, the one that the quick version strips out, is that releasing the how is itself a form of spiritual discipline. It requires more of the viewer, not less. It requires holding the desire clearly when the visible world says nothing is coming. It requires maintaining the gratitude when the numbers do not support it. It requires acting faithfully when the action does not yet show a visible payoff. It requires, in short, exactly what the word faith has always meant. Not belief based on evidence, trust sustained before evidence arrives. And that is not passive. That is one of the most demanding things the human mind can be asked to do. The method will appear. Not all at once, and not necessarily in the form the mind had approved, but it will appear. And when it does, it will not look like the result of the anxious planning that preceded it. It will look like one next step that opened another step. It will look like a door that appeared in a wall you had already written off. It will look like a conversation that led somewhere the calculation could not have predicted. The method is real. The route is real. But it assembles itself through the movement of a faithful, clear, active mind, not through the panicked demands of a mind that needs the whole map before it will agree to move. There is an error operating beneath the surface of the how question, and most people who carry it have never named it directly. It does not feel like an error. It feels like diligence. It feels like taking your situation seriously. It feels like the responsible, grounded, mature response to real financial pressure. But beneath the feeling of responsibility, beneath the calculations and the research and the constant strategic adjustment, there is something else operating. Something Wattles would have recognized immediately. Something that looks like control, but is actually a refusal to trust. The name for this error is anxious method worship. It is the condition of placing so much importance on finding the correct method that the method itself becomes the object of faith rather than the source. The person suffering from this error is not faithless in the emotional sense. They often feel deeply spiritual. They pray, they declare, they hold intentions. But the moment the prayer is finished, the mind returns to its original question. Yes, but how? as if the prayer were the spiritual portion of the process and the how question were the practical portion, and both were required before anything could move. As if faith needed to be completed by method before it was allowed to count. Wattles never described the process that way. He described faith and action as one unified movement in the certain way. Faith was not the preamble to the real work of figuring out the method. Faith was itself the primary posture from which all action was taken. The how would emerge from that posture. The how was not the precondition for that posture, but the anxious, method-worshipping mind has reversed the sequence. It places the discovery of the method before the granting of full faith, and then wonders why the faith never feels complete and the method never becomes clear. Here is how the error reveals itself in practice. The viewer feels a clear desire, a genuine pull toward a life that is larger than the present one. And immediately, almost simultaneously, the mind activates its evaluation system. Is this desire realistic? Is there a visible method for achieving it? Have I seen other people achieve it through a traceable route? Can I calculate the steps from here to there? If the evaluation system does not return a satisfying answer, the desire is quietly downgraded. Not rejected outright, but moved into the category of things that would be nice if they happened, rather than things that are already in process. And that downgrade is not wisdom. It is the error in disguise. The mistake that the viewer has been making is confusing method control with responsibility. These are not the same thing. Responsibility means taking faithful action in the present moment with the resources and clarity available. Method control means insisting that the full route must be visible before full commitment is granted. One of these is compatible with the certain way. The other blocks it. The person who acts in genuine responsibility does not require the full map. They ask, what is the clearest, most aligned next action available to me in this present moment? And they take it. The person trapped in method control asks, where will this lead? And can I verify the route before I commit? And when the route cannot be fully verified, they wait. And the waiting, clothed in the language of wisdom, becomes the primary activity. This error shows up not only in what the viewer refuses to do, but in what they continue to do out of pure habit. They return to the same visible channels. They reapproach the same closed doors. They recalculate the same figures in the hope that the numbers will somehow change this time. Not because they believe it will produce a different result, but because returning to the known method feels safer than opening to an unknown one. The familiar channel, even when it has clearly stopped delivering, represents a known quantity, and the mind prefers a known quantity that disappoints over an unknown possibility that might require trust. It is important to be precise here, because there is a version of planning that is not this error. When a mind that is already in the state of faith, already holding the clear desire, already acting in the certain way, pauses to assess the next best available action, that is not anxious method worship. That is aligned thinking. The difference is not the act of thinking about method. The difference is the inner condition from which that thinking is done. Planning from faith is organized, calm, open, and responsive. Planning from fear is frantic, narrow, and closed. The error is not in the planning. The error is in the fear state that drives the planning and makes the plan the condition for the faith rather than the expression of it. The way to identify this error in your own experience is to notice where the sense of urgency concentrates. If the urgency is located primarily in the need to find a method, then the source has been relegated to secondary status. It is waiting for the method to arrive rather than the method waiting for the source to reveal it. If the urgency is located primarily in the desire itself, held with warmth and certainty, and the action comes as a response to that living desire rather than as a frantic search for a route, then the posture is closer to what Wattles described. The question is not whether you are thinking about method. The question is whether the method has become the master, displacing the source from the position it must hold for the law to operate. The error you did not see is the hierarchy. You place the how above the source, not with intention, not with theological deliberation, simply through the accumulated habit of a mind trained to believe that visible routes are more reliable than invisible laws. The mind that has been trained this way is not broken. It is operating correctly according to its training. But its training is wrong about this one critical point. The source does not wait for a method the mind has approved before it begins to move. It moves through the state of the one who trusts it. And the one who is primarily occupied with finding the method is not, in the deepest part of their attention, in the state of trusting the source. They are in the state of trusting the method. And the method by itself is not enough. This error can coexist peacefully with deep spiritual sincerity, and that is precisely why it is so difficult to see. The viewer may be genuinely faithful in many areas of their life. They may have experienced real moments of trust and real moments of unexpected provision. But in the specific area of financial receiving, the error has been running beneath the surface, quietly reversing the sequence every time the pressure builds. The correction does not require shaming this tendency. It requires naming it clearly and understanding why it operates, which is what the next teaching addresses. There is one more thing to name before leaving this section. The anxious, method-worshipping mind often filters out guidance that does not come in an approved form. When the still, quiet inner prompting suggests a direction that the mind has not already calculated as viable, the mind dismisses it. When an opportunity presents itself through an unexpected channel, the mind's first response is suspicion. When a door opens in a direction that the how question never pointed to, the mind hesitates to walk through it because it was not part of the plan. And by doing this, the viewer rejects the very provision that the source has arranged through channels the calculating mind never would have chosen. This is not bad luck. This is the error completing its own cycle. The source provides. The method-worshipping mind declines the delivery. And then the mind asks again, how will this ever happen? The question that deserves an honest answer is this: why does the how-demanding mind feel so reasonable? Why does anxious method worship present itself with such convincing authority? Why is it so difficult, even after hearing the teaching, to simply let it go and trust the source? The answer is not weakness. The answer is history. And before the correction can take deep root, the history must be acknowledged. Your mind learned to demand visible methods through a process that began long before your current financial situation. Every time in your past when something did not work out, the mind recorded a lesson. Be more careful. Have a clearer plan. Do not trust what you cannot verify. Do not move until the path is confirmed. This is not a failure of character. It is the learning function of a mind that was trying to protect you from repeating painful experiences. The problem is that in learning to avoid the pain of the past, the mind also learned to avoid the openness that the future requires. Social conditioning adds another layer. The culture most people were raised in regards visible method tracking as a virtue. Responsible people have plans. Serious people calculate risks. Reliable people do not act on things they cannot verify. The person who says, I am trusting in the source to open a channel I cannot currently see, is likely to be met with concern, skepticism, or gentle ridicule by the people around them. And rather than holding their inner position against that pressure, most people quietly capitulate. They pretend to agree that yes, of course they need a clear method. Yes, they need to be more realistic. Yes, trusting in visible supply without a visible plan is probably not responsible. And they carry that capitulation back into their inner life, where it becomes the governing voice. Financial fear has its own particular language, and it is very persuasive. When money is genuinely short, when bills are real, when the pressure of provision is immediate, the mind that says, stop asking how feels reckless. The fear speaks clearly. People who trust in visible supply instead of making a plan end up in worse trouble. People who release the how end up with nothing. The responsible thing is to figure out the method. And this voice, reasonable and urgent and practically oriented, is not easy to argue with when the bank account is low. It sounds like wisdom because it speaks in the vocabulary of protection, but protection purchased through anxious method control is not the same as provision generated through the certain way. Past failure reinforces this error with particular force. If you have tried to trust before, if you have released control on some occasion and it did not work, the mind will use that experience as permanent evidence against trusting again. The memory of the time it did not work becomes louder than the memory of the times it did, This is a known characteristic of the protective mind. It amplifies painful memories to prevent recurrence. And so the previous time you trusted and felt disappointed becomes the primary argument the mind reaches for when the teaching asks it to trust again. What is not examined is whether that previous trust was actually the certain way trust Wattles described, or whether it was a vague hope with no clear desire, no grateful certainty, and no faithful action. Those are not the same thing. The survival instinct is also deeply involved in this error, and it would be wrong to speak about it without acknowledging its legitimate presence. When your physical survival feels connected to your financial situation, the nervous system activates. Survival pressure is not imaginary, it is biological, it is real. The demand to have a plan when survival feels threatened is not a spiritual failing. It is the body doing what bodies have always done when they feel unsafe. The question is not whether that survival signal is real. It is whether obeying it by hunting frantically for a visible method is actually the most effective response. Wattles would argue that it is not, because the survival panic narrows the field of perception precisely when the field of perception most needs to expand. There is another reason the error feels like wisdom that is rarely acknowledged. Having a detailed how provides a sense of agency and dignity. When you have a method, you feel like someone who is doing something. You feel active rather than passive. You feel engaged with the problem rather than surrendering to it. And in the absence of visible progress, the act of calculating the next how is at least an action. It at least feels like movement, even if it is circular movement that never closes the gap. The mind prefers the dignity of having a plan, even an ineffective one, over the apparent vulnerability of trusting a source it cannot see. Because trusting a source you cannot see looks, from the outside and sometimes from the inside, like giving up. This matters because the correction cannot simply be, "Stop being afraid." That instruction ignores the entire history that made the fear reasonable in its own frame. The correction must be something deeper. It must be a genuine reorientation of what the mind understands to be safe. Safety in the certain way does not come from the visibility of the method. Safety comes from the certainty of the law. The source does not fail. The formless substance does not run out of channels. The law that Wattles described does not have exceptions for difficult markets or complicated personal circumstances. When you genuinely understand that the law is reliable, not because you feel comfortable but because you have studied it and tested it and found it consistent, then the demand for a visible method begins to lose its grip. Not because the fear disappears, but because the law becomes more trustworthy than the fear. The error feels like wisdom because the mind that produces it has always been trying to help you. It has been trying to protect you from disappointment, from failure, from the vulnerability of trusting something you cannot control. Those are not evil motivations. They are the protective functions of a mind that has experienced pain and does not want to experience it again. The teaching is not that this protective function is wrong. The teaching is that in this specific area, the protection it offers is actually less reliable than the law it is trying to substitute for. The source has a better track record than the method your mind approved, but the mind will not know that until it gives the source room to demonstrate it. Compassion is the right response to this error, not self-criticism, not frustration that the mind keeps returning to the how question. Compassion for the long training that made this pattern feel like the only safe option. And then, from that compassion, a quiet, firm decision to choose differently. Not because it is easy, not because the fear has gone away, but because the law is more reliable than the fear, and because the life waiting on the other side of the how question is worth the inner discipline required to stop asking it before faith has chosen the direction. The mind that has been demanding a visible method before granting faith is not a broken mind. It is a trained mind operating from an incomplete map of reality. The map it has is accurate about many things, but in this one critical area, it has been missing the territory. And now the territory is being described by someone who walked it before you, someone who understood that the source moves through a different channel than the one the calculating mind approves, someone who called the whole thing the certain way and trusted it enough to write about it for people who would not read it for generations. You need to understand what actually changes when the inner state changes. This is not a vague spiritual claim. It is a description of a specific mechanism, one that Wattles addressed and that anyone who has lived on both sides of it has recognized. When the inner state shifts from anxious method hunting to faithful, clear desire, something concrete happens. Not in the stars, not in some distant metaphysical realm. It happens in the perceiving instrument itself. The mind begins to function differently because it is now organized around a different center. A mind locked in anxious how calculation is experiencing a specific form of perceptual narrowing. This is not poetic language. When the nervous system is under fear pressure, when the mind is running its urgent search for a method, the field of attention contracts. It focuses on the visible, the measurable, the already known. It filters out peripheral information as noise, because the survival function has decided that only directly relevant data matters right now. This means that the mind in the how panic state is literally perceiving less of the world than the mind in the state of faith. It is not that the open doors have disappeared, it is that the narrowed instrument cannot register them. When the inner state moves toward genuine faith and clear desire, the perceptual field expands. The mind begins to notice what it had been filtering out. A name that comes up in conversation that it would previously have dismissed. An impulse to reach out to someone that it would previously have second-guessed. An unusual combination of events that it would previously have called coincidence. A door in a direction it had not been facing. None of these are supernatural deliveries. They are ordinary elements of the world that a different inner state is now equipped to perceive and act on. The source works through those ordinary elements, but it requires an instrument that is sensitive enough to register them. Timing is also affected by inner state in ways that Wattles understood as part of the mechanism. When the mind is locked in anxious calculation, it either rushes or freezes. It rushes when the fear reaches a pitch that demands action, any action, to release the pressure. It freezes when the fear convinces it that no available action is safe. Neither of these is the certain ways kind of action. The certain ways kind of action is responsive, not reactive. It is the action of a person who is listening, rather than one who is either shouting or hiding. And the timing of that listening action aligns naturally with the timing of what the source is opening. Because the source is not on a human panic schedule. It is on the schedule of what is actually possible, and what is actually possible often opens at a moment the anxious mind has already declared too late. Speech is part of the state too, and it is more powerful than most people give it credit for. The words that come out of the mouth when the inner state is fear are different from the words that come when the inner state is faith. In the fear state, the mouth speaks the calculation. It narrates the problem. It lists the obstacles. It rehearses the debt, the delay, the inadequacy of the available channels. And every time those words are spoken, the inner state is reinforced. The calculation becomes the most vivid image in the mind. The gap becomes the dominant impression. Wattles understood that the inner image, held repeatedly with emotional intensity, is what the formless substance responds to. If the inner image being held most consistently is the image of lack and blocked channels, that is the impression being communicated. In the state of faith, the speech changes, not into denial, not into false cheerfulness that pretends the problem does not exist, but into something that holds the desire as real while releasing the demand to control the method. In this state, the mouth speaks the desire with certainty rather than the gap with urgency. It says, "This is coming and I am moving toward it," rather than "this cannot come because there is no visible how." That change in speech is not cosmetic. It is a change in the dominant inner impression, and the dominant inner impression is what the mechanism responds to. Action is also transformed by inner state. When the inner state is anxious method hunting, the actions taken are usually either compulsively repetitive or scattered. The same door knocked on again. The same calculation run again. A series of unconnected efforts that carry the emotional signature of desperation rather than clarity. When the inner state is correct, the action that arises feels different. It is often quieter, less frantic, more precisely targeted. Not because the person is doing less, but because they are doing what is actually called for rather than what the panic demands. Wattles called this doing every day what can be done that day. It is full engagement without the exhaustion of trying to force outcomes. The present action cannot produce alone. The source does not move through a mind that is supervising its every impulse with doubt. This is one of the clearest things Wattles implied. When an impulse arises in a mind that is in the certain way posture, the appropriate response is to evaluate it in the spirit of the desire, not in the spirit of the fear. Does this next step point in the direction of the clear desire? Is there something available in this present moment that I can do faithfully and correctly? If yes, then the action is taken, not because it guarantees the result, but because the law requires faithful movement in the direction of the clearly held desire. The source can then work with that movement in ways the calculating mind could not have predicted. It is also worth naming what happens when the state is only partially corrected. A mind that holds faith in the morning and returns to the how panic by the afternoon is sending mixed signals, not in a mystical sense, but in a very practical one. The inner image is unstable. The impression being communicated to the deeper mind is contradictory. One part says, "This is coming, I trust the source." Another part says, "Wait, but how? And where? And what if it does not?" The mind that vacillates between these two states does not get the full benefit of either. The signal is confused, and the action that follows from a confused signal is itself confused. This does not mean the viewer must be perfect. It means consistency of the inner state is worth building deliberately as a practice, which the next section will address. The source does not obey whims. It is not a force that activates every random desire and delivers it regardless of the inner state from which it was requested. Wattles was careful about this. He said the law is not a dispensing machine that responds to wishes. It responds to the sustained, clear, grateful, faith-held desire of a person who is also acting in the certain way. The inner state required is specific: clarity of image, certainty of faith, gratitude as a living practice, faithful action in the present. When those four are in place together, the mechanism operates. When one of them is replaced by anxious method demanding, the mechanism is interrupted. The source has not failed. The conditions required for the mechanism to function have been altered. The invisible supply available to every person in every circumstance is not the limited pool of visible channels. It includes every person not yet met, every conversation not yet had, every door not yet seen, every arrangement not yet in place. The source sees all of that simultaneously. The calculating mind sees none of it. The question is not whether there is a how. There is always a how. The question is whether the inner state of the one asking is capable of receiving the how when it presents itself, or whether the how-demanding mind will dismiss it because it did not arrive through an approved channel, on an approved timeline, in an approved form. Receiving is a state. Wattles did not describe receiving as a passive waiting, but he understood that there was a quality of openness in the person who was genuinely in the certain way that made them receptive to what the source was organizing. That openness is not available to a mind that is locked in anxious calculation. The locked mind is too busy searching, demanding, calculating, and controlling to be receptive to what is actually moving toward it. The shift in state, from control to trust, from how demanding to faithful, clear desire, is not giving up. It is opening the hand that has been clenched so tightly around the old method that nothing new could enter it. The mechanism is real. The law is consistent. The source moves through the changed state with reliability that no visible method can match. This is the central confidence that Wattles offered, not a guarantee of instant results or a promise of wealth without effort, but a precise description of the inner conditions under which the invisible law begins to organize visible provision. And those conditions begin, always, with the correction of the inner state. Everything else follows from that. The shift you are being asked to make is not from effort to passivity. It is from effortful interference to faithful participation. The difference is everything. And the mechanism will confirm that difference in your experience, but only if you sustain the corrected state long enough to perceive what begins to move. There is a common fantasy about how the method should appear. The mind imagines a moment of complete clarity, a full vision of the route from here to the desired destination, each step numbered and confirmed, every figure verified, every person identified, every timeline approved. The mind believes that if it received this complete map, it would finally be able to trust and to move without anxiety. But this complete map almost never arrives. Not because the source is withholding it, but because that is not how the law operates. And waiting for the complete map before trusting is another form of placing the method above the source. The method appears as one next step. This is perhaps the most important practical truth in the teaching of Wattles that gets lost when the message is simplified. He did not promise a blueprint delivered in advance. He described a process of faithful movement in which the next right action becomes clear to the one who is holding the clear desire with faith and acting in the certain way. The path assembles itself through the movement, not before it. The river does not wait for the entire landscape to be mapped before it moves. It moves, and the movement itself finds the channel. When the inner state is corrected, when the clear desire is held with genuine faith and grateful certainty, the first thing that changes is not necessarily the visible circumstances. The first thing that changes is the attention. A name arises that did not previously arise. A different response to an old situation presents itself. A resource that was always available is suddenly noticed. A connection that had been dormant becomes relevant. These are not dramatic events. They are quiet beginnings. The mind that is still demanding the complete map will dismiss them as too small, too indirect, too uncertain to count as a real step toward the desired result. And by dismissing them, it passes the first provision by. Wattles described the faithful action as taking the step that is immediately available, the step that is in the direction of the clearly held desire, taken in the spirit of the certain way. Not the step that guarantees the result, not the step that makes the full route visible, the step that is available now, taken faithfully, correctly, and without attachment to what it alone will produce. That step creates a new position. From the new position, the next step becomes visible. From that next step, another becomes visible. The route assembles itself through faithful sequential movement, not through advanced delivery of a complete plan. This sequence, desire to faith to calm action, to new perception to unexpected method, is not linear in the way the mind hopes it will be. It does not unfold on a predictable schedule. The new perception may arrive quickly, or it may arrive after a sustained period of faithful holding. The unexpected method may present itself soon after the shift in state, or it may require the viewer to hold the inner posture through several rounds of the old mind returning with the how question. But the sequence is reliable in the sense that Wattles meant. The source knows what it is organizing. The mind does not need to supervise that organization. It needs to participate faithfully in the present moment and remain open to the next step as it appears. One of the most powerful illustrations of this is the experience of unexpected conversation. You may have had the experience of mentioning your desire to someone, not in a desperate plea for help, but in the natural movement of conversation, and finding that they knew someone, or had information, or could open a door you had not known existed. That conversation could not have been forced by calculation. It could not have been produced by the anxious how question running its endless loop. It arose because you were moving, talking, engaging with the world from a clear inner position, and the source moved through that ordinary moment to open an unexpected channel. The unexpected method often arrives through channels that the fear mind would have filtered out as irrelevant. A chance encounter with someone outside your usual network. A book that falls open to the right page. An instruction that comes during a quiet moment rather than a planning session. A door that opens not because you knocked on it, but because someone on the other side opened it for their own reasons that happen to align with your movement. None of these are accidents, but they are also not the results of anxious calculation. They are the results of a mind that is clear, faithful, and moving in the right direction, available to receive what the source is organizing through the full range of visible channels. The how does not arrive as certainty. It arrives as direction. This is a critical distinction. The mind demanding the full method before granting faith wants certainty. It wants the route to be confirmed before the movement begins. What actually arrives when the state is corrected is direction, the sense that this next step is the right one, that this open door is the one to walk through, that this impulse is the one to follow. That is not certainty in the mathematical sense. It is the inner clarity that comes when the desire is clear, the faith is genuine, and the action is aligned. And from that direction, taken faithfully one step at a time, the method eventually reveals itself in full. The timing of the method's appearance is also instructive. It rarely arrives at the moment of the highest pressure. It more often arrives in a moment of relative inner quiet. When the frantic calculation has been set aside for a moment of genuine stillness, when the prayer or declaration has been held with real peace rather than desperate urgency, when the mind is not actively hunting but rather faithfully open, that is often when the next step presents itself. This is not evidence that the method requires passivity. It is evidence that the receptive state and the hunting state are different, and the hunting state is itself a form of static that the quiet signal cannot penetrate. Wattles also understood that the method, once it begins to appear, requires prompt, faithful action. When the door opens in an unexpected direction, the one who has been waiting for the complete map will hesitate. They will check it against the plan. They will evaluate whether it fits the method they had approved, and in that hesitation, the opening may narrow or close entirely. The certain way requires that when the next available right action presents itself, it is taken in the spirit of the desire, in the condition of faith, without waiting for confirmation that the entire route has been revealed. The one next step is enough to take. The next step after that will be revealed in its time. It is worth noting that the unexpected method does not always look prosperous at first. It sometimes looks like a conversation that requires humility. It sometimes looks like a step backward before a step forward. It sometimes looks like an action that is not yet financially significant, but that moves something in the invisible arrangement. The calculating mind, which evaluates every step by its immediate visible return, will dismiss these steps as unworthy of the scale of the desired result. But the law does not promise that each step will look like the desired result. It promises that each faithful step taken in the right direction is part of the process through which the desired result forms. The sequence is not a formula to be executed correctly and then forgotten. It is a way of living that eventually becomes natural. At first, choosing faith over the how demand requires deliberate effort. It requires catching the fearful question as it rises and choosing not to be governed by it. It requires taking the next available step before the complete map arrives. It requires trusting that what the source is organizing through channels you cannot see is more reliable than what the calculating mind can plan. Over time, if this practice is sustained, it becomes less an effortful choice and more an inner orientation. The mind that once demanded the complete route before trusting slowly learns through repeated experiences of the source, delivering through unexpected channels, that the source is trustworthy. And that trust is the foundation of the life Wattles was describing. The method always appears, not always in the form expected, not always on the timeline the mind had approved, not always through the channels identified in advance. But it appears. It appears because the source that Wattles described is not indifferent to the desires of the one who approaches it in the certain way. It is organized around the principle of expansion. The person who holds a clear desire with faithful gratitude and acts in the certain way is working with the grain of that expansion. The method that appears through that working is not the calculation of the old mind. It is the provision of the source, taking form through the open instrument of the one who stopped demanding the how and started walking toward the desire. The difference between the person who receives and the person who remains waiting is not intelligence. It is not luck. It is not the quality of the plan. It is whether they were willing to take the next step the candle illuminated before the rest of the room was fully lit. That willingness is what the certain way produces in the one who has genuinely adopted it. And that willingness is the practical expression of everything this teaching has been building toward. The shift being described here is not an emotional shift. It is an identity shift. There is a version of you that has been operating from the position of needing to know the route before trusting the source. That position feels natural because it has been your operating center for a long time. It has accumulated evidence in its favor. It has a logic you can articulate. It has a history of protecting you from certain kinds of disappointment. even if it has also been blocking a certain kind of provision. The shift required is not simply deciding to feel differently about the how question. It is becoming the person who no longer occupies the position that makes the how question primary. The new posture can be stated simply: I do not need the full method to take the next faithful step. This sentence, held not as a motivational phrase but as a genuine inner position, changes the operating logic of the mind. When the full method is not required before action, the action that is available right now becomes legitimate. The impulse that does not yet lead to a visible guarantee becomes followable. The door that opens from an unexpected direction becomes worth walking through. The whole field of possible next actions expands because the filtering system that was eliminating everything unapproved by the full method has been turned off. This new posture replaces control with obedience, not obedience to another person and not blind passivity. Obedience to the nearest right action. When the mind stops requiring a complete map, it becomes sensitive to what is actually available in the present moment. It can ask, what is the next aligned action available to me? And then take it, without demanding that it alone produce the full result, without needing it to confirm the whole route, taking it because it is aligned with the clear desire, because it is available now, and because the law requires faithful movement rather than waiting for certainty. This is not the same as impulsive action. The mind in the certain way posture does not leap at every open door without discernment. It evaluates each available action in the spirit of the clear desire. Does this move in the direction I have clearly defined? Is this aligned with the life I have held in the inner image? Is this the kind of action that a person who genuinely expects this life would take? Those questions are not method-demanding questions. They are clarity questions. And they come from the inner authority of the one who has chosen a direction and is moving faithfully toward it, rather than from the fear of the one who is trying to guarantee a result before committing. The person who has made this shift can be recognized by how they speak about what is coming, not with the forced cheerfulness of someone performing confidence they do not feel, but with a quiet certainty that the direction is correct, even when the full route is not visible. They speak as people who expect delivery. They act as people who are already cooperating with a process that is real, even if it is not yet fully visible. They take the steps that are available today with the full dignity of someone who knows where they are going, even when they cannot see every mile between here and there. The old posture of needing the full method before committing was not only blocking provision, it was also blocking identity. The person who cannot move without the complete map remains in their deepest self-understanding someone who is dependent on the visible world to tell them what is possible. The person who has made the inner shift no longer depends on the visible world for permission. They carry their permission from the inside. They have chosen a direction based on a clear desire held with faith. And they move in that direction, regardless of whether the visible world has yet confirmed the route. Authority is the right word for what the inner shift produces, not the authority of arrogance, the authority of someone who has decided, someone who knows which direction they are facing, and who takes the next available step in that direction with the quiet confidence of a person who trusts the law more than the visible evidence. This authority does not come from having solved the how question. It comes from having released it to the source and occupied instead the position of the faithful mover. It is an inner authority that the calculating mind never possessed, because the calculating mind always needed the visible world to confirm that the authority was justified before it would exercise it. Wattles described this quality when he spoke of acting in the full faith that the increase is coming. He was not describing a performance of confidence. He was describing a genuine inner occupancy of the position of the person who has already decided and is now moving faithfully in the chosen direction. The difference between that and acting out of anxious desperation is palpable. It is palpable to the person themselves, and it changes the quality of every action they take. An action taken from inner authority carries a different quality than an action taken from fear. And the world, including the people in it, responds to that quality differently. The shift can be made in a moment of decision, but it is sustained only through practice, and the old mind will return, as it always does, with the how question. This is not evidence that the shift failed. It is evidence that the old training has not yet been fully replaced. The response to the old mind returning is not to argue with it, not to shame yourself for its return, and not to capitulate to its demand. The response is to notice it, name it, and return to the clear desire, the gratitude, and the next available faithful action. Each time you do this, the new posture is reinforced. Each time you return from the how panic to the certain way, the new identity becomes more stable. The new posture also changes how you receive. When the method of control is no longer your primary inner position, the hands open. You become receivable in a way that the clenched control posture never permitted. An unexpected suggestion from someone becomes worth considering, rather than immediately evaluated against the pre-approved method. An open door from an unexpected direction becomes worth walking toward, rather than immediately dismissed, because it did not appear on the plan. The shift in identity is also a shift in receiving capacity, and that shift in receiving capacity is what allows the source to deliver through the full range of channels available to it, rather than the narrow range the calculating mind had approved. You do not have to believe all of this fully before beginning. You only need to be willing to take the next available faithful step without demanding that it first reveal the complete route. That is enough to begin. The law does not require complete mastery before it begins to operate. It requires movement. It requires the inner posture of the person who has chosen the direction and is walking in it, one step at a time, trusting that the source that arranged the invisible supply is more reliable than the calculation that has so far failed to find it. The inner shift is not a single event. It is a daily choosing. Every morning the mind will offer you the old position, the how demand, the calculation, the anxious survey of visible channels. And every morning you can choose the new position instead. Over time, the new position becomes less effortful to hold. The identity of the person who trusts the source and acts faithfully, one step at a time, without needing the complete map, becomes more natural. And the life that identity can receive becomes gradually and then suddenly visible in the world around it. The practice that follows the inner shift must be simple enough to sustain. Complexity is the enemy of consistency, and consistency is what the law requires. This daily practice is not a ritual of positive thinking. It is a deliberate act of realigning the three elements Wattles described: the clear desire, the state of faith, and the faithful action, in a form that takes only a few minutes but produces a significant change in the inner posture for the day. Begin by writing the desire, not a vague wish, a clear, specific, definite statement of what you are seeking. Write it in the present tense. Write it as if it already belongs to you. Not because pretending it is yours will trick the universe, but because a statement of present tense desire forces the mind to occupy the position of the one who already has it, rather than the position of the one who is desperately waiting for it. Write it without caveats, without the fear additions that typically surround the desire. I want this, but I do not see how, and I am not sure I deserve it. And even if it comes, it might not stay. Write only the desire, clear, definite, specific. Then look at everything you have written or are about to write about how it might come. Look at the channels you have been trying to force. Look at the methods you have been insisting on. Look at the timelines you have been calculating. Look at the conditions you have been placing on the source, the requirements that it work through this person, this opportunity, this approach, before you will allow yourself to trust, and cross them out. Not symbolically. Actually, draw a line through them. Not because they are necessarily wrong channels, but because the act of crossing them out is the practice of releasing the requirement that the source use only them. You are not eliminating the possibility that one of those channels may be part of how the provision arrives. You are eliminating the requirement that it must be. After crossing out the anxious how demands, ask one question. What is one present action available to me today that is aligned with the desire I have written? Not the complete plan, not the action that will by itself produce the result. One action, the next available action, the step the candle illuminates right now. Write it down. It may be a conversation, it may be a piece of work, it may be a decision that has been deferred, it may be a door you have been hesitating to approach because it did not fit the method you had planned. Whatever it is, write it down as the faithful action for this day. Then close the practice with a moment of genuine gratitude, not the performance of gratitude in the hope that it will accelerate delivery. The actual experience, however brief, of being grateful that the desire exists, that the law is real, that the source is reliable, and that the next step is available. This moment does not need to be long. It does not need to produce a feeling of profound spiritual bliss. It only needs to be genuine. Even 30 seconds of real gratitude, held quietly before the activity of the day begins, re-establishes the inner condition that the law requires. The entire practice takes less time than the mind spends in a single anxious calculation session. It does not require a journal of 100 pages. It does not require a complex visualization sequence. It does not require attending any course or purchasing any system. It requires a piece of paper, a clear desire, the willingness to cross out the demands, the identification of one aligned action, and a moment of genuine gratitude. That is the daily practice. And if done consistently, not perfectly but consistently, it produces a cumulative effect on the inner state that the single session How Panic never could. The practice is also a form of record. Over days and weeks, you will see the desires written repeatedly. You will see the actions taken, and you will begin to notice, often only in retrospect, that the actions taken in the certain way spirit produce something the anxious calculations did not. The record of the practice becomes evidence, your own evidence gathered over time, that the law is reliable and that the method appears through faithful movement rather than anxious method hunting. That evidence is worth more than any testimony from outside your own experience. One important note about the practice of crossing out the how demands. This is not a practice of denying that practical actions may be needed. It is a practice of releasing the requirement that any one specific channel must be the delivery method before faith is granted. If crossing out a channel leads you to discover that actually taking a step through that channel from a position of faith rather than panic produces a different result, that is a valid discovery. The practice is not anti-planning, it is anti-requirement. The plan becomes a servant of the direction rather than the master of the faith. On the days when the practice feels empty, when the desire is written and the gratitude is hollow and the how demand returns before the pen is even set down, do it anyway. Not in the hope that the feeling will come, but because the act of doing it consistently is itself part of the training. The mind learns from repetition. Every day that the practice is completed, even without the accompanying feeling, is a day that the new pattern is being reinforced over the old one. Feelings will not always cooperate with the practice. Do the practice regardless. The law is not contingent on how the practice feels. It is contingent on the consistent direction of the inner attention. The practice works in any environment. It does not require quiet or privacy, though those help. It does not require a specific time of day, though morning before the day's demands take over is usually most effective. It does not require any tools beyond what is needed to write. It is portable, sustainable, and scalable. As the practice deepens, the clearing of the how demands becomes faster because the mind learns to release them more readily. As the desire becomes clearer, the actions identified become more precisely aligned. As the gratitude deepens, the state of faith becomes more stable throughout the day. The practice builds on itself, and the inner state that the law requires becomes more consistently available. This is the daily practice, simple enough to maintain, precise enough to matter, built on the actual teaching of Wattles rather than a simplified version of it. Write the desire, cross out the demands, identify one faithful action, hold the gratitude, walk through the day in the direction the practice has established. That is enough. The source does not require more preparation than this. It requires the consistent inner posture this practice builds, and from that posture, maintained faithfully, one day at a time, the method appears. Here is what no one tells you about making the inner shift. After you have made it, genuinely made it, held the clear desire with faith, crossed out the anxious demands, identified the faithful action, felt the relief and the inner authority and the quiet certainty, the old question will return. Not politely, not gradually, it will return with urgency and it will bring evidence. It will arrive on a morning when the bill is due and the account is short. It will arrive in the voice of someone you trust who says, with genuine concern, that you really should have a plan. It will arrive in the silence of 3 in the morning when the mind has nothing else to do but run the calculation one more time. The return of the how question is not evidence that the shift failed. It is the test of whether the shift was real. Bills are the most direct and legitimate feeling trigger for the how question's return. When a real financial obligation arrives with a real deadline, the mind's insistence on a visible method feels completely justified. This is not a spiritual exercise, the mind says. This is a real bill, and you need a real method for paying it. And that argument is not wrong about the bill's reality. It is wrong about the conclusion it draws from that reality. The bill is real, the deadline is real, the pressure is real, and the response that is called for is not denial of these things. The response that is called for is the faithful identification of the clearest available next action while maintaining the inner state of trust, not the abandonment of the inner state in favor of frantic method hunting that has not solved this problem in any previous round. Silence from the expected channels is another powerful trigger. You have taken the faithful action. You have moved in the direction of the desire, and the visible world has not responded. The person who was going to come through has not called. The opportunity that looked like it was opening has gone quiet. The next step, which seemed clear a few days ago, is no longer presenting itself. And in that silence, the how question returns with a particular force. You see, nothing is happening. You trusted and nothing moved. You need a method. The mind takes the silence as evidence against the law, rather than as the space in which the law is organizing what the mind cannot yet see. Other people's doubts carry a weight that surprises most people who thought they had made the shift. Someone close to you, someone whose love and concern you trust, expresses worry about your direction. They ask practical questions. They point to the absence of a visible plan. They remind you of what happened last time. They are not trying to harm you. They are trying to protect you in the only way they know, through the vocabulary of visible methods and calculable safety. And their concern, expressed with genuine love, can be more destabilizing than any external obstacle, because it speaks to the part of you that still measures trust by the standards of the people you care about. Delays are perhaps the most quietly destructive test, not a dramatic obstacle, just time passing without the visible confirmation that the law is operating. The day after the inner shift, the decision feels alive. The week after, it feels like something that needs to be held deliberately. The month after, the old mind begins to construct its argument with accumulated evidence. It has been this long, and still nothing. Surely by now there should be something visible to point to, and this argument, made more compelling by the passage of time, begins to sound like a reasonable reassessment of the situation. It is not. It is the old mind using the neutral fact of time passing to try to reclaim the position of control it lost when the inner shift was made. The return of the old question under pressure does not mean the viewer has failed. It means the old pattern is strong. And it is strong because it has been the operating system for a long time. The mind does not replace its deepest patterns with a single decision, any more than a river immediately cuts a new channel after one redirection. The new channel must be carved through repeated faithful choice. Every time the how question returns and is met with the response, I release the how and let the source move, the new channel is deepened. Every time the how question returns and the old panic takes over, the old channel is widened. The test is always the same test. The response determines which channel becomes dominant. The returning how question also has a specific quality that distinguishes it from genuine practical discernment. Genuine practical discernment asks, what is the next available faithful action? It is calm, specific, and directional. The returning how question asks, but what if there is no route? It is panicked, general, and aimed at destabilizing the inner position rather than identifying a next step. When you can tell the difference between these two inner voices, you have already made progress. When you hear the genuine practical question and answer it with a faithful action, and hear the panicking how question and respond to it with the declaration rather than with surrender, you are operating in exactly the way the certain way requires. Wattles understood that the pressure of visible circumstances was real. He did not write for people in comfortable situations who had the luxury of philosophical experimentation. He wrote for people under genuine financial pressure, people who needed this law to operate under conditions that made anxious method hunting feel mandatory. The test of the teaching is not whether it works when things are comfortable. The test is whether the inner posture it requires can be maintained when the bill is due, the channel is silent, the person you trusted has not delivered, and the timeline you counted on has passed. That is when the teaching proves itself or does not. And the strength to remain in the certain way under that pressure is what the following teaching describes. There is a specific form of comfort available in the moment of the returning how question that the panicking mind cannot access. It is the comfort of the law itself, not the comfort of visible confirmation that everything is fine. The comfort of knowing that the source has not changed, that the law is still operating, that the invisible supply is still available, and that the faithful maintenance of the inner posture continues to communicate the clear desire to the formless substance even when the visible world has not yet responded. This comfort is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of something more reliable than the difficulty's apparent permanence. The question returns because the training that produced it was long. The circumstances that activate it are real. The people who reinforce it are genuine in their concern. None of these things have to be eliminated before the inner posture can be maintained. They only have to be met with the right response. The right response is not an argument. It is not a performance of confidence. It is the quiet return to the clear desire, the gratitude, the faith, and the next available faithful action. Every time the return is made, without drama and without self-punishment for having been pulled away, the new identity is reinforced. That is the only test. And it is a test that can always be passed one return at a time. There may be a period, and honesty requires naming it, when the test is daily and sometimes hourly, when the pressure is high enough that the how question returns constantly and the faithful maintenance of the inner posture feels like swimming against a powerful current. This is the critical period. This is when the teaching is most needed and most difficult to apply. The instruction for this period is not to achieve perfect inner peace. It is simply to return, each time, to the clear desire and the next available faithful action. Not perfectly, not without feeling the pull of the fear, but repeatedly, consistently, with the understanding that each return is itself an act of the law operating through you. The test of faith is not a punishment. It is the process by which the new identity becomes real. A conviction that has never been tested remains theoretical. A faith that has only been practiced in comfortable circumstances has not yet been demonstrated as genuine. The pressure of the returning how question, the bills, the silence, the delays, the doubts of others, is the condition under which faith becomes something more than a pleasant idea. It becomes the living posture of a person who has actually changed. And the sign of that change is coming in the next teaching. There is a specific sign that tells you the inner shift has taken root. It is not the disappearance of the how question. The question may continue to arise for a long time after the shift has been made. It is not the disappearance of financial pressure. Circumstances do not always change immediately when the inner state changes. It is not the arrival of complete certainty about the future. Certainty of that kind is not what the certain way promises. The sign of genuine change is this: you can hear the how question without obeying it. This is the sign worth recognizing and honoring. The how question arises as it will. The bill is there. The silence is real. The timeline has passed. The person doubts. And you feel the familiar pull. You feel the urgency of the demand. You recognize the old voice with all of its reasonable-sounding arguments about responsibility and risk and the danger of trusting something you cannot verify. You hear it clearly. And then, instead of immediately reorganizing your entire inner state around its demand, you hold your position. You return to the clear desire. You name the next available faithful action. You speak the declaration, and you keep moving. That is not emotional numbness. That is not indifference to the reality of the situation. It is something more powerful than either of those. It is the demonstration that the controlling authority inside you has shifted. The old mind is still producing the how question, because that is what old minds do. But the self that hears it is no longer the same self that used to obey it reflexively. A space has opened between the arising of the question and the response to it. And in that space lives the new identity. The person who has heard the how question and said, "I see you. I understand what you are trying to protect me from, and I release the how and let the source move." This sign can first appear in small ways. You notice that you recover from the how panic more quickly than you used to. The spiral that once lasted a day now lasts an hour. The paralysis that once prevented action for a week now produces only a pause before you return to the next faithful step. These small recoveries are not minor. They are evidence that the new pattern is gaining ground. They are the beginning of the mastery that the certain way builds in those who practice it consistently. As the sign becomes more consistent, something else becomes visible. The actions you take from the recovered position, the actions taken after hearing the how question and choosing not to obey it, carry a different quality. They are taken with more precision, more alignment, less desperation, and therefore more receptivity to the response they generate. The door you walk through without needing the complete map is walked through with greater dignity and presence than the door you previously approached while internally demanding that it confirm the whole route before you entered. And doors respond to that dignity. People respond to that presence. The world reorganizes itself, not magically, but practically, around the inner authority of the person who has stopped asking the how question from fear. The sign that you have changed is also visible in your speech. The way you talk about what is coming changes, not into fantasy, not into denial of present reality, but into the language of someone who expects delivery. When people ask about your plans, you speak from the direction of the desire rather than from the defense of the doubt. Not because you have a complete route to describe, but because you have a direction and you know the next step and you trust the source with the rest. That change in speech is not performance. It is the outer evidence of an inner shift in identity, and it is heard differently by the people around you, including the people through whom the source may be preparing to move. The quiet mastery that begins to emerge through this process is not the mastery of having solved the how question. It is the mastery of having moved the how question from the position of governing authority in your life to the position of one voice among several, a voice that can be heard, acknowledged, and then respectfully set aside while the certain way continues. That is a profound change. It cannot be faked. It cannot be performed. It has to be built through the repeated practice, through the tests, through the moments of faithful return. But when it is genuinely present, it changes everything. Not because the visible world has confirmed it, but because the identity from which you are now operating is one that the source can actually work with. The sign is not the arrival of wealth. Wealth is a result that follows from the sustained practice of the certain way. The sign is earlier than the wealth, it is internal. It is the recognition that you can stand inside your financial difficulty, hear the how question, feel its urgency, and still choose the clear desire, the faith, the gratitude, and the next faithful action. That is the sign. And if you have experienced even a moment of it, however briefly, however imperfectly, you already know that it is real, and you already know that the person capable of that choice is a different person from the one who was previously being governed by the how question's demand. The difference between hearing the question and obeying it is not small. It is the entire distance between the old identity and the new one. The old identity was defined by what it could see and calculate. The new identity is defined by what it trusts and moves toward. The old identity needed the how to feel safe. The new identity has found its safety in the law. And the law, as Wattles described it, does not fail the one who approaches it correctly, who holds the clear desire with faith and gratitude, acts in the certain way, and releases the how to the intelligence that already knows all the channels the calculating mind has never seen. Maintain the practice. Return to it each time the question comes, not with frustration that it came again, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows what to do with it. Over time, the recovery will become faster. The space between the question and the faithful return will become wider, the new identity will become more stable, and the life that the new identity can receive, hold, and live in will begin to take visible form, not because the calculating mind finally found the right method, but because the faithful mind finally released the wrong demand and let the source move through channels wider than the calculation ever imagined. There is a sentence that stands at the boundary between the old mind and the new life. It is not a sentence of certainty about what will happen. It is a sentence of release. It is a sentence that lifts from the source the requirement to fit inside the mind's approved methods and restores the source to the position that allows it to move. That sentence is this: I release the how and let the source move. When you say those words with genuine understanding of what they mean, you are not abandoning the process. You are completing the first essential condition of the process. You are removing the blockage that has been placed between the clear desire and the infinite supply available to fulfill it. You are not saying, I have no direction. You are saying, I have chosen the direction and I am releasing the delivery to the intelligence that knows more channels than I have ever seen. That is not irresponsibility. That is the operating posture of someone who has finally understood the certain way at the level it was meant to be understood. The phrase releases the grip. It releases the white-knuckled holding of the method. It releases the anxious supervision of the visible channels. It releases the requirement that the source prove itself through an approved route before the faith is fully granted. And in releasing all of that, it creates the inner spaciousness that the law requires, the space into which the new perception can arrive, the space in which the unexpected channel can be noticed, the space in which the quiet inner instruction can be heard and followed without the static of the how demand drowning it out. The release is not emptiness. It is the opening of a hand that has been clenched too long. The source that Wattles described is not waiting for you to deserve its provision. It is not withholding delivery until your plans become convincing. It is not measuring the quality of your calculation before deciding whether to move. It is organized around the law of expansion. It is always moving toward the increase of life in those who approach it through the certain way. What it requires from you is not a better method. It requires the clear desire held with faithful gratitude and the action of the certain way. And it requires that you release the demand to control how it delivers. When you give it that release, you give it permission to exceed every limitation your calculating mind has ever placed on what is possible. Every time you release the how today, you are giving the source more room than the how ever occupied. Every time you cross out the fearful demand and replace it with the faithful next step, you are cooperating with a process that is larger, older, and more reliable than the anxiety that has been managing your financial life. Every time you hear the question and choose the declaration instead, you are becoming more fully the person whose identity is compatible with the life the desire has already defined. You are not waiting for the life. You are becoming the self that the life is waiting for, and the source, which sees both the self and the life and the distance between them, is the most reliable bridge there is. Let the source move. Let it move through the conversation you did not plan, through the door you were not facing, through the provision that arrives from a direction you never calculated, through the arrangement of circumstances the old mind would have dismissed as coincidence, through the timing that seems too late and turns out to be precisely right, through the people who did not appear on your list of viable channels and turn out to be the ones the source always intended to use. Let it move, not because you have stopped caring about how your life changes, but because you have finally trusted the intelligence behind it more than you trust the fear that has been supervising it. This release is not a one-time decision. It is a daily recommitment. Every morning, the old mind offers the how question again. Every morning, the declaration is the response, not a recitation, but a genuine inner act. The act of a person who remembers each morning that the source is more capable of organizing the provision than the calculation ever was. That the clear desire held with faith communicated to the formless substance through the practice of gratitude and the certain way action is the most powerful thing you can do for your financial life. More powerful than any method the old mind ever approved. Releasing the how is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the part of the story where things actually move. The pages before this moment were the pages of the anxious search, the demanded map, the rejected provision, the circular calculation. Those pages were real. The difficulty in them was real. The desire in them was real. But the story was stuck. The release is the moment the story begins to move again, not because the visible world changed immediately, but because the inner instrument that perceives and receives and acts within the visible world has changed. And when the instrument changes, the world it perceives and the opportunities it can engage with change with it. Hold this phrase not as a comfort but as a law. I release the how and let the source move. Say it when the bill arrives. Say it when the channel goes silent. Say it when the timeline passes. Say it when the doubts of others press against your inner position. Say it when the calculation returns with its urgent demands, not to make the fear stop, but to tell the source that you have made your choice, that you are holding the desire with faith, that you are taking the next faithful step available to you, and that the delivery is in hands more capable than the calculating mind. The source will confirm that choice, not on your schedule, on the schedule of what is actually possible, which is always larger than the schedule you drew in your panic. If this teaching has reached something in you, something that already knew this and had been waiting for the words, then write below what you are choosing today. Write the declaration. Let it be the first visible evidence of the inner shift you are making. Write, I release the how and let the source move. Not because a YouTube channel asked you to, but because you are choosing the source over the method. Because you are choosing the certain way over the calculating panic. Because you are choosing the life waiting on the other side of the how question over the safety of the old mind that has been managing you into the same place. These teachings are part of a longer journey through the masters and the laws they spent their lives understanding. The next teaching in this sequence addresses what to do when there appears to be no path at all. Not a hidden path, not an unexpected path, but the specific experience of looking in every direction and finding nothing open, nothing visible, nothing moving. That particular experience has a law behind it too, a law that is older than the fear it answers. And the masters understood it with the same precision they brought to everything they wrote about invisible supply. If you are ready to continue walking through these laws, remain with this channel and let the next teaching meet you when it is ready to meet you. The doors the next teaching addresses are already being discussed. The law behind them is already being interpreted. If your desire for this kind of serious, deep, master-sourced teaching on spiritual prosperity is real, you do not need to be reminded to return. The desire itself, held with the clarity this practice produces, will bring you back when the next teaching is available. The source does not close, the law does not sleep. The invisible supply does not wait for visible conditions to become favorable before it is available. And neither do the teachings that lead you deeper into the understanding of how to align with it. You have heard the law today. Now walk in it, one faithful step at a time, without demanding the full route, without requiring the complete map, with the clear desire, the grateful certainty, and the release that the certain way has always required. The source is already moving.